While I've had a lot of positive to say about Splatoon 3's overall special design, especially when compared to the previous games, there's been one aspect that's left me feeling a little disappointed. Let me start by talking about Inkjet, for example. Inkjet got my favorite special buff throughout this entire game's lifespan, and this is the added height from the Inkjet boost. I think this is really fun. It allows you to get into brand new locations, use it as an evasive maneuver, and honestly, whenever I go back to Splatoon 2 and experience Inkjet in that game, it feels so much more awkward to control. It's kind of like squid roll or health bars. Once you get used to it, it feels so weird that you ever didn't have it before. More importantly though, I think it's a change that directly improves on Inkjet's design because it adds a lot of interesting depth to the special. It makes it more interesting and engaging and gives new options to use. But when it comes to most of its special changes, I think my big complaint is that Splatoon 3 has tended to do the opposite. Generally, I think that specials over the course of a game's life should get more interesting and tweaked in ways to make them more fun to use or enhance their strengths. In this game, I think a lot of them have become a lot more basic and a lot simpler. In some cases, I'd go as far as to say that they end up feeling weaker from a design perspective than they did when they started. So today I want to go through and talk about special changes that happened after their release that I felt either took away from the special or missed other more creative opportunities. Let's get started. So the next special I want to talk about is Ultra Stamp, which is a special I have continually praised for its design, but critiqued that it isn't that powerful, and if it were to get more powerful, would that interfere with that balance? And with the way they've done it right now, absolutely. I like that it does better damage to certain objects. I like the idea that it can turn faster and that it's easier to see through it. Those kind of changes work well, but it's also subject to two changes that I think are a lot harder to agree with. The Rush mode has a giant outside radius increase of 43% for an attack that does 40 damage, and the Throne mode has an absolutely giant hitbox for both its 220 and especially its 60 damage hitbox, when that used to be much less damage previously. Now, when it comes to these changes, I do understand a little bit where they're going with this. Ultra Stamp was a notoriously inconsistent special before, and that applied to both the Throne mode and the Rush mode. There would be times where it really feels like it should have killed someone, and it just didn't. And when it came to the Rush mode, I felt that was enough of an excuse. This outside hitbox, while a little bit crazy, is a 3-shot and you have to be right next to the hammer, and it fixes its Rush mode consistency. You know, I'm kind of okay with that, even if you lose out a little bit. And the Throne mode is another one where, again, I kind of get it. Having the idea of Throne Stamp giving you more value in exchange for ending your special early is an interesting dynamic. Making it so it's easier to work off of other teammates' damage is a great way to make it more consistent. But again, this radius just feels a little bit crazy to me sometimes. And this is one where I felt they definitely went overboard, specifically with the lethal radius. The 220 hitbox is unbelievably lenient right now, and it just makes the special feel a bit cheap at times. Stamp still does retain a lot of the depth that it has right now, but it doesn't help how the special looks that a lot of the time the best use case is just chuck it at the enemy and pray. Sometimes instead of seeing a lot of interesting dynamics between the special and its opponents, I just see a mini Splatling throw it to refill their ink tank like 5 times in a single match. And that, to me, does take away from a lot of the special's intrigue. A similar case can be made for Reef Slider. Again, at the start, a few explosion radius increases did feel fair. The hitboxes were tiny, especially on 220, but nowadays, it feels a little bit ridiculous. The 220 hitbox is massive, the 70 hitbox is huge, special power-up increases it further, and until the most recent patch, it also painted the zone too much. This special already didn't have that much depth to it. It was mostly just where you used it and where you decided to blow up along the trail. And if anything, that's become less interesting. In order to help make it harder to cheese zones, they made the Reef Slider trail shorter in the most recent version, which means the amount of options you have when using the special actually feels lower than before. It's not that the special is necessarily weaker. Moving the hitbox to where it was more consistent definitely was a buff to it, but it's definitely become a special that is just known for its giant stupid blast radius more than anything else, and I don't think that's a very solid identity for it. It's not really particularly fun to use, even for someone like me, and it's also very heavily complained about when going against it. Sometimes there'll be radius increases where I just have to question why they happened in the first place, even if they don't dramatically ruin the special's design. And this is true with Booyah Bomb and Ink Vac to me. Booyah Bomb, when it got its buffs, did have a need to get a little bit faster. It was struggling with matching the pacing of the current meta, and I think making it a little bit faster made sense, even if it's a bit overtuned right now. But why do we need to increase the radius by 5%? And I know 5% might not sound like a lot, but with the special this large, I promise you it is. This change wasn't needed when the other changes already did plenty. Ink Vacuum was a similar deal. It had already gone to larger radius. Why did the most recent version needed to give it a larger one as well when the change giving it more HP was already enough for it? Ink Vacuum, I think I have a bit less of a problem because at least the special has to absorb enough ink to have that radius, and the amount of ink you need to absorb is larger in this version, so I guess I understand it for that reason. But it's another case of, does this really need to be flipping giant zones on its own? Does it need to be this large of an explosion? Probably not. And hey, while we're talking about big radiuses, I might as well also mention Triple Ink Strike, because Triple Ink Strike has been a special that immediately lost a lot of its depth very early on. The dynamic between the special was originally supposed to be how vulnerable you were when using it versus the power it had when it was used. The power it has when it's used has been overtuned for a while. The damage is ridiculous, the paint caps objectives, which we seem to only care about with Reef Slider for some reason, and the radius, like with a lot of these, is quite large. I don't think this was a great way of balancing the special, and I think it's been mostly overlooked because of how much time has passed. We interrupt this video to call all big shots to New York City this summer. Metro Inc. proudly returns with their 2-day Splatoon regional tournament, Gridlock. On July 11th and 12th, up to 32 teams will duke it out and grab the title of New York City's best, featuring a starting prize pool of $1,000 and a social night to meet your fellow squids and hang out with friends, as well as dedicated stat tracking. Gridlock will be even bigger and better with more competition than before. Check out start.gg/gridlock for more info on registration and ways to get connected with the community. So outside of overtuned radius increases that make the special more boring, there's also other cases where I feel there were opportunities missed when buffing it. And to me, the prime candidate for talking about this is Super Chump. Now, if you're not super invested in the competitive scene, you might not realize that Super Chump's reputation has gotten a lot better recently. It's seen as a pretty solid special, even if not amazing right now. So why? Because you can use it really fast and it paints the floor like a lot. Like it's like 120 points when it lands, and if you paint over it, the explosions might paint even more. That's kind of boring, right? And like, that's true, and you can see the strength when that's pointed out. That is a ridiculous number that keeps your main weapon active. But wow, is that like the most boring reason for a special to be good ever? It's just an immediately use it and forget about it. That requires a slight amount of positioning for putting them in the right spot, and that's just kind of it.
Okay, but that's worse. I mean, you do get how that's worse, right?
Super Jump's most unique attribute about them is the fact that they are a fake jump marker landing. But how often is that actually playing a factor when the special is being used? Because I would wager very few of them. None of the changes done to make this special stronger were done in a way that enhances what makes the special unique, that very attribute. But I think having the paint be as crazy as it is, and having the jumping attribute be as underused as it is just a case of wasted potential. Okay, let me get a small break to talk about some positive special changes, because I've definitely been jumping on these a little bit. Let's talk about their Inkstorm and Wavebreaker changes. While not revolutionary, Wavebreaker getting a location effect when it's initially used does enhance the special's identity a lot and makes sense for what it is. Inkstorm also meshes with this effect very well, even if it's not the most noticeable thing in the world. So I'm also fine with it. These are cool creative changes that I wish we saw elsewhere, and I don't have a big problem with them. Anyway, getting back to wasted potential, another candidate here is Splatter Color Screen. Besides the already egregious fact that this special still affects people negatively with disabilities, the initial concept of a special that, messes with your game in some way could have been really interesting, but I can't help but think of a million different better ways that this could have been handled. What if the special took away your UI so you couldn't tell if you had players alive or specials active? What if instead of having a buggy audio distortion, we could mess with the game audio, for instance, and make it quieter so you can only really hear the music, or have the music have an interesting effect over it since, that is a thing in the game commonly. There's just much more interesting ways this screen could have had an effect on the player base. And on top of that, I do still think that Splatter Color Screen blocking players' vision on your own team is still a problem. There is no other special in the game that can grief your own team to this degree, and whenever that happens, it's pretty annoying. The last main special I want to talk about today, though, is Kraken. Kraken has gotten some much-needed nerfs to tone it back in various ways, but now it's been underpowered for quite a while, and this is about where buff should come in to make the special have a bit more interesting back-and-forth interactions while providing it more power. Instead, we have gotten nothing, and I can't help but bring that up here as a mischance. These are all the main specials I want to talk about when it comes to this, though they're not the only specials to get radius changes. I just don't think things like Zipcaster being able to one-shot people are a problem, and changes like Tentamissiles having a smaller radius and Bubbler having a larger radius are probably better changes more than anything else. But really, my point is just, I think a lot of balance changes have been turn radius number up, or just have neglected more interesting ways to balance the special, and I would have hoped that 3+ years into the game's lifespan, some of the specials would have gotten more interesting changes besides just Jetpack, Inkstorm, and Wavebreaker, and I hope we see more in the future. This is a good time to get creative with changes and give people reason to try out specials that they haven't seen in a while, and hopefully we'll see some of that. Thanks for watching.